Here's our first stop in Washington, D.C., the National Cathedral. This cathedral's so big, and awesome, I bet Jesus lives there. Now we are in the inside of the cathedral. The cathedral is made entirely out of stone, and it is the size of our church times like 3, so it's humongous. This is the space window. It is a chunk of moon rock in the window from the moon, so which makes it awesome, and it's dedicated to NASA. For his presidential inauguration, President Obama sat in this very chair, and I also sat in this very chair, which means I sat exactly where the president sat. So I'm like extremely lucky. Here's a fancy picture carpet that some very good artist made in his free time. Here's where we sat and took our pictures in front of the cathedral after we were done with the entire tour. And I'm in the way back with a blue shirt. Here was where President Lincoln was assassinated in 1864 by John Wilkes Booth. This was in Ford's Theater, and while it's cool to see where Lincoln got shot, the entire thing was really boring and I fell asleep. Here is one of the 2 statues of Franklin Roosevelt. He's sitting in his wheelchair, and handicapped people wanted that because they thought that it would be awesome for them to see one of our past presidents who's crippled to be in a wheelchair. Like, they has no shame to be in a wheelchair. And here is where we all sat on a few giant stones right by one of the waterfalls at the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial. And there's Nick creeping in on the side. Here's another statue of Franklin Delano Roosevelt with his little Scotty, which I don't know what its name is. Now we have one of the many waterfalls at the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial. There's a ton of these and they're really awesome, like me. And here's a picture of us standing in a food line at the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial. That's fun. Here's a picture of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial from across the Potomac River. This is the bronze statue of Thomas Jefferson. It was made to commemorate him, and is only a few centimeters or inches smaller than the Statue of Freedom that stands at the top of the Capitol. And here we got the President's crib, the White House. Inside was really cool, but pretty small. This woman, who's in this like tent with an umbrella, has been protesting nuclear warfare in front of the White House for over 30 or so years. And that is some craziness, man. Here's a statue of Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Park. And here's a side shot of our nation's capital. We'd be going in there later on the next day. And this is like one of the many times we'd see the Capitol. And here's our nation's Supreme Court, where very important trials are held. During the tour there, it was very interesting, but I fell asleep. This weird, like, grassy place is what I call the grotto. It has channeled water from a well, and it's provided water for you to drink. And it's in back of the Capitol, which is like a really weird location. And here's the changing of the guard ceremony at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Here's the gravesite of our nation's 35th president, John F. Kennedy, buried next to his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. He was also buried here in Arlington Cemetery with his brothers. Above his grave is the eternal flame. Here's the Iwo Jima Memorial, dedicated to the American soldiers that fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima. And here's the Vietnam Memorial, with a little can sculpture that a veteran made for his friend. Here's a statue of 3 soldiers by the Vietnam Memorial. And that is the reflecting pool where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech in front of, and in the background there's the Washington Monument. Now here was our last stop of the day, the Lincoln Memorial. People say that there is a picture of Robert E. Lee's face on the back of Lincoln's head. Here's George Washington's cool house with a lake view, Mount Vernon. Here's a view from the backyard of George Washington's house, Mount Vernon. And that's a pretty sweet backyard view, if I might say myself. And here's a scale model of the Statue of Freedom that stands on top of the U.S. Capitol. But the difference is this one's made out of marble. Here's the picture of the inside of the U.S. Capitol's rotunda. There you can see in the middle is George Washington sitting among the gods. Here's one of the many places in the Capitol where you can see statues of people that are important to certain states that they have donated to be put inside the U.S. Capitol. Here's some of the finely crafted architecture inside the Library of Congress. Here's a wall of really sweet murals inside of the Library of Congress, which is really cool on the inside. It looks like a palace. Here we are at one of the many Smithsonians, and that is a giant elephant. And here's a picture of a lion attacking a buffalo at the Smithsonian. And here's the world's rarest gem, the blue diamond. In fact, it's so rare that this is the only one of its kind. And here are some replicas of my favorite animals, the manatees. Here we are in front of the JFK Performing Arts Centers, and here's the Hall of Country and States flags. And here's a wall of names that helped build the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center, at the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And here are some of the crystal chandeliers donated by Sweden at the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And they're really awesome. And here's a sign of one of the opera houses in the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And here's a picture of the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial on top of the JFK Performing Arts Center. And here's a sky view of the two bridges that connect Washington, D.C. with Virginia on top of the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And here's a really awesome picture of sunset that you can find on the top of the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And here are some more pictures of George Washington's house, Mount Vernon. And here are some of the china recovered from Mount Vernon that George Washington ate off of. Here's another amazing view of the Potomac River from behind Mount Vernon. And here's George Washington's personal carriage. As you can see, he was a wealthy man with awesome, cool things. Well, from that time, I guess. And that right there is George Washington's grave. And here's a picture of me, Allie, and Brady at the Mount Vernon gift shop. We had toy guns, which were cool. And here's a picture of a bull that lives on the Mount Vernon property. And he lives in a little farm. After Mount Vernon, we traveled to the U.S. Capitol. That is a picture of the mayor of New York City, Mayor Bloomberg. And here's a picture of the Library of Congress across the street from the U.S. Capitol. That is a statue of Helen Keller, who is blind and deaf, but completed college, which is amazing. And she didn't have a seeing eye dog, so that's pretty cool. As we went into the Library of Congress, here's a chandelier we took a picture of. And looks really cool, so. And here's a statue donated by the state of California of one of our greatest presidents, Ronald Reagan. And that is a picture of some babies holding a ball or something that you can see on the inside of the U.S. Library of Congress. And there is the arch as you enter into the Library of Congress that says Library of Congress. Here's some more pictures from the Smithsonian. Here is this really cool rock that, I don't know how it would formed it, but it's got a ton of bubbles inside. It looks really awesome. Here's another awesome view of the sunset on top of the JFK Performing Arts Center, taken by yours truly. On our last day in D.C., this was our first stop, the World War II Memorial. Here was the two fountains in the middle of the memorial, and sometimes there's little water cannons not under the water, and then it shoots water into the air, and it looks cool. Here are some battle sites of World War II carved into these rocks, and they're part of the fountain. Now here we are at the Air and Space Museum. That was the same rover that led the first mission on the moon. This is a scale model replica of the first plane ever that flew by Orville and Wilbur Wright. Now here we are at the Smithsonian of American History. That same hat was the hat that Lincoln wore when he was shot. This stool and kitchen set was owned by George Washington. And here we have one of the cars for the Dumbo ride at the first Disney World ever, started by Walt Disney. Here's a sky view of our nation's capital. Under that you can see the National Mall where they're having a military exposition. Here's a sky view of the World War II Memorial, which we'd been to like 5 hours before, maybe, I don't know. Here's a sky view of our nation's president's house, the White House.